everyone, it's Seji and welcome to another episode of a book chat with, I'm so excited because I finally have the absolute pleasure of being here with Liz Gilbert.
Hi, Seji! Imagine how excited I am to be
But
here with you.
yeah, only this time a bit with more distance.
A little
Yeah,
bit at a safe distance. Yeah, we took that
exactly.
6 feet, that 3 meter distance, and we just expanded it to about 9,000 miles just to be on the safe side. So I'm
Exactly.
pretty sure that I'm not going to infect you with anything, and you're not going to infect me with anything.
Pretty
Can't be
sure.
too careful though. Don't touch your
Exactly.
screen.
No touching of screens, no face touching, nothing. So we're here today to talk about City of Girls, of course, which the
Yay!
paperback is coming out on the 7th of April, which is super exciting. So, yeah, could you talk about the book? I, of course, know what it's all about, but
Yeah, and by the way, your little song and dance routine video that you made for it when it came out last year is still one of my favorite things that's ever happened. Yeah, so the book is a novel. It is set in mostly in the New York City theater world of the 1940s, and it's about a young woman named Vivian Morris who is a very privileged, not a bad person, just a sort of oblivious, spoiled, entitled girl who's very pretty, and who is also very lazy and gets kicked out of Vassar College for failing all of her classes. And her parents, her very affluent parents, not knowing what else to do with her, send her to New York City to live with her Aunt Peg, who is a bohemian woman who owns a theater company called the Lily Playhouse in Midtown Manhattan, and that is a down on its kind of shabby, down on its like bohemian, kind of weird proto vaudevillian show palace that Vivian falls completely in love with and finds her home in and her place with, and she starts hanging out with the showgirls and the actresses and playboys and just breaks wild and goes from being a very sheltered girl to a very promiscuous girl. And so it's a book about young women behaving very badly with their sex lives and running around until the consequences catch up with them. But it's also a celebratory book about what it means to be young, what it means to take risks. I've wanted for years to write a novel about promiscuous girls whose lives are not ruined by their choices, because I thought that it was long overdue that we had a novel like that. Because women are always so punished in literature for being sensualists. And the book is told from the point of view of Vivian in her 90s, answering a question that has come to her in a letter about who were you to my father. And so the whole book is told in the form of a letter to a younger woman who we don't know anything about until the end of the book and when it's all pieced together. And that is City of Girls. And my intention with it was to try to write a book that would go down like a tray of champagne cocktails. And I'm now at this moment on earth, I'm more happy than ever to have written a book that is a frothy piece of diversion for people, because I feel like that's really what a lot of people need right now. So yeah, if you want some escapism, City of Girls is it.
definitely. Yeah, no, because like of course I read the book before it came out last year, and like when I was coming up with all of my questions, it was just such a nice thing to do, because it just reminded me of like how much fun the book was and like how giddy I felt reading it. So it was just kind of like, it felt like I was reliving the story again. So it was great.
Oh, thanks, honey. Thank you. I had so much fun writing it. I had so much fun researching it. I had so much fun finding all these women in their 90s and hundreds to talk to me about their experiences in back in the mid-century New York City and in the theater world. It was just a blast. It was just a blast to disappear into that world. So I'm glad you had fun with it too.
So how was it actually talking to all those women about their experiences?
Oh my God, Seji, they were amazing. Okay, so one of the things was that I was really uncertain going into it. I was like, how am I going to get these elderly women to talk to me about sex? Because so much of the book is about sex, and it's about a particular kind of girl, a girl who's more concerned about freedom and excitement than she is about safety, and who lives with a certain wildness and abandon. And I know that kind of girl has always existed. She existed in 1940. She existed in 1840. She exists now. It's not that they're hard to find, but it's a little harder to find them when they're in their 90s and their hundreds. But actually, I found them, and they wanted to talk about that. And one of them in particular, this woman named Norma Amigo, who was in her mid-90s when I met her, and she'd been a showgirl and an actress and a dancer, and she'd been John Wayne's girlfriend, and she'd had so many adventures with men. She'd never gotten married, never had kids, never wanted to, always was a sensualist, always said, my rule with men, it's a line in the book that Vivian says, my rule with men is that they could come, they could go. The door was always open. She never wanted to belong to anybody. She never wanted anybody to belong to her. And she just spoke of her life with such pride, that she had truly lived her life on her own terms. And she was very funny too, because she said, my family is still angry at me. Her family of origin was still angry at her that she had not taken a more conventional life. And they were like, what did they say? She said, they still say to me, someday you're going to regret it. Someday you're going to be sorry that you never married and had kids. And she said, I'm 94. I'm waiting, I've never regretted it for a minute. And, she was very open about her 5 abortions. She had no regrets about them whatsoever. She had some very, very fascinating, detailed information about what it was like getting abortions in the 1940s and 50s, and how, like, these crazy little details where she said, yeah, well, all the girls knew you wanted to go to a Catholic city to get your abortion because they gave so many of them, because birth control was illegal. So she said the really safest place to go to get an abortion was in Boston or in Mexico City, because birth control was illegal, so the doctors were really accustomed to delivering abortions, and so it was the safest place to go. So we would just get on the train and go to Boston for the day. Or if your boyfriend had money, we'd go to Mexico City and then make a vacation out of it. And I was like, oh my God, this is like, she was so relaxed. She'd talk about her venereal diseases. She talked about how she picked men up, and she was just completely, and the best line was, she said, I said, so you never regretted that you didn't get married? And she said, and excuse my language, but I'm quoting directly from a 94-year-old woman. She said, oh, hell no. Who wants to fuck the same man for 65 years? And as soon as she said that, I was like, okay, I'm ready to write this book now, because these characters did exist, and these kind of women do exist. And this book is a celebration of a woman like that. So, it was really, really fun.
Because that's something I thought was always so very interesting about the book, because, of course, you have all these type of women who are, like, exploring their sexuality and are and are celebrating their sexuality. And it's not like a story we get to hear often, especially when it's like historical fiction. It felt like these women didn't exist, but I felt it was still so authentic in that sense. Like, they really did exist.
They really did, yeah. And I think that there's a misconception that we have. I think every generation thinks that they discovered sex, and every generation thinks that they invented it. And I definitely think culturally we have a mass misunderstanding where we think that there was no such thing as free love or open sexuality before the 1960s at the least, or before the advent of birth control. But it's simply not true. And society has never really known what to do with women like that, because they make people really uncomfortable, because there's a very narrow path that girls and women are taught that they can walk in order to be considered respectable. And that path has not gotten much less narrow over the years. Like, it's still pretty narrow. And so when you encounter somebody who simply not only refuses to adhere to that path, but it's almost as if they can't even see it. What path? Like, they just can't. Like, that's who Vivian was, and it's who her friend Celia was too. They just can't stay on the path because they don't even recognize it as existing. It's kind of amazing.
One thing I thought was interesting about the book as well is that Vivian, of course, goes to this through this huge transformation. I mean, like, we're talking 70 years of a life lived, and her personal growth felt very real and natural, and it was really nice to see someone being able to candidly, like, reflect on their younger years, talk talking about like the things that weren't that great. How did you go about that aspect of character development? Was it something that you felt like, okay, I'm going to plot it out, or was it something that kind of like came about like naturally?
It's a kind of a combination of both. So for me, like generally what I've noticed about my novels is that the first, a novel is setting, character, and plot, right? Those are the three elements. And I always know the setting first. I think it partially has to do with me being a traveler or something about my curiosity about the world. Mm-hmm. Before I know anything, I know where I want this story to take place because I want to fall into that world and disappear into that world. So it's always very easy for me to figure that out. And then the second piece is who's in that world. Okay, so now you have the world. So for me, it was, okay, I want to write a world about New York City in the 1940s because it just seemed like the most impossibly glamorous moment of New York history, one of the most impossibly glamorous moments of world history. And I've always wanted to write a Valentine to New York City because I love it so much. And so this could be a way to do that. And so that was it. So first I had the setting, and then, okay, who's in that world? And that's where I came up with that idea of I want to write about promiscuous girls, and what better world for them to be in than wild, bohemian New York City in the 1940s. Mm-hmm. The hardest part for me is what's it about? Like that's always been the hardest part for me. Sorry, I'm just moving my thing so that I'm getting a lot of light reflected in here and I don't want to blast your eyeballs with it. So we know where it is. We know who the people are in the world. What are they doing? And that takes a while for me to figure out. And that usually comes to me very slowly as I'm researching the world and the people within it of that time. I start to get hints of character. And for me, the big breakthrough with the novel was when I decided that it would be a letter. And I decided that it would be a letter from the daughter of a man who had been in Vivian's past, who wanted clarity about what their relationship was. And then once I had that, I was able to go. But the honest truth was I had the whole book plotted out, except for I didn't know what the relationship was going to be between Vivian and Angela's father. Mm-hmm. I knew who he was. I knew when they met. I knew what the circumstances were of their meeting. I knew when he would arrive in the book. But once he showed up in her life, I actually had not figured out in advance what the central answer was to Angela's question. Who was he in your life? And what I ended up doing was just having to do this big leap of faith to write the first 400 pages of the book without knowing the answer to that. And then 300 pages. And then when they finally met each other, I turned the story over to them, because by that point I knew Vivian so well and I knew him so well that I was like, okay, you two, now you're meeting. You take it from here. You tell me what you are. And much to my surprise, the relationship evolved from that point.
Yeah, so that's something I thought was so special about it, because throughout the book, for me, because I thought it was like so excellent that it was like a letter, and you're like throughout the book trying to find out exactly like, okay, was it this guy or was it this guy?
Yeah. Right, because there were so many.
Yeah. Exactly, and you're just thinking, and then you find out who it eventually is, and then you see how that relationship evolves, and it's such a unique one, and I don't really even think I've ever seen it before in a book, because I feel like lovers is not the right word for it, but also like not like having like friends either. It feels far more intimate than friendship. So I was like interested in and how you felt about the relationship.
I'll tell you something, and maybe this reveals more about me than I should, but what the hell. One of the motives for this book was that somebody who had read my last novel, The Signature of All Things, which was about a woman who was very brilliant, but also was very lonely in love. She'd had a big misunderstanding at the beginning of her marriage that had cost her a lot of pain. And then she had never found true love past that in her life. And she was actually a virgin for her entire life. And somebody wrote to me on Facebook years ago and said, I love your writing. I love this book. I have a challenge for you. Please give us a love story next time. And I was like, oh you're right. I've never written a love story. Like, hang on, I'm going to scooch over again because this light is following me. Okay, there we go. I was like, I've never written a love story. That's kind of amazing. And then it really became this challenge because I was like, I will have to write a love story that I personally believe. Like, I can't write a romantic, naive love story. And so what's going to take for me to tell a love story that I actually believe these two people really loved each other? And so there were all these tropes that I couldn't follow because I was like, I don't know. And like, I had thoughts like, they can't be young because I wouldn't believe it. You know what I mean? Like, it can't be like a young romance because they don't know enough yet. And the world hasn't beaten them up enough yet. They're not humbled enough yet. They're not broken enough yet and damaged enough yet to be able to meet each other as true, vulnerable human beings. So they have to be older when they meet. And it can't just be a sexual adventure because Vivian has already had so many of those in her life. It's got to be something completely different. So I love that you said that you'd never quite read a love story like it. But in the end, I submit those two, and I won't say his name because it's a spoiler alert, but Vivian and that man really loved each other. and that was a true love story. It just wasn't a conventional one.
I thought it was actually excellent in having it that way, because it felt so refreshing, because usually when it's like, okay, this is going to be like a romantic story and it's like, oh, I fall in love with you, and then it's like and then they have sex and they have like children and like they live happily ever after, and it's like, that's not really how life works, like most of the time. So it's really fun to see it from.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
So moving on, this book so funny. Like, there were so many aspects I was like just laughing out loud and had like vicarious embarrassment. Like, for instance, the scene when Vivian loses her virginity.
I don't think I've ever had more fun writing a scene in my life than that scene. Again, I was like, I want to do this differently than it's ever been done.
Yeah. So how was that, like, writing those type of passages? Were they your favorite, or were there like other things that you really enjoyed writing?
There were a couple scenes in that book that I had a lot of fun writing, but that one was the one that I was like, as soon as I came up with the idea, which was several years before I wrote the book, it just was like a secret that I had in my pocket, where I was like, oh my God, I cannot wait to write this scene. And even as I was writing the beginning of the book and leading up to it, I was like, okay, hurry it along. Let's get to that scene. Because again, I feel like as a reader, and especially as a female reader, I feel like there are really only two virginity loss scenes that you ever read. And one of them is the incredibly traumatic one. Which is often the case with people in that situation, but like the devastatingly traumatic one. And then the other is the impossibly romantic one. So there's one that I don't want to read because it's too disturbing, which is the incredibly traumatic one. And there's one that I don't want to read because I don't believe it, it's like, it's such a weird, awkward thing to lose your virginity. It's so like, how often is it pleasurable even for the woman the first time she has sex, for it to be a pleasure? It just, and so I was like, I want to do it in some way that is just so completely different, that is neither traumatic nor romantic. and so what exists as a way that you could lose your virginity that would be neither traumatic nor romantic? And that would be mechanical, and kind of like, what was it, like, transactional, transactional in a way where there was just an agreement that this is what was going to happen, and that itself becomes such comedy, that even Vivian, as it's happening to her, can't stop laughing at how ridiculous it is. And I also love that that scene is really where she bonds, not with the man who's totally inconsequential. I think there's a line in there where she says, like, he was an a regular looking man with average features. And then she says, if it sounds like I've completely forgotten what he looks like, it's because I've completely forgotten what he looks like. Like, he was so inconsequential. But what happened in that scene was that the losing of her virginity had, of course, been brokered by her friends, the showgirls, who found somebody who would take care of it for her and sent her to his house and arranged the entire thing. That's the real story that's happening there, is that she's having a rite of passage into womanhood and friendship with these much more sophisticated girls who are taking her under their wing and arranging this in the way that they think will be least traumatizing for her. And what she comes away with out of that is she's lost her virginity and she's made these friends, and now she belongs, and it's they're real friendships. There's like, it's about female bonding more than anything else.
Yeah. Definitely, it felt kind of like this sorority feel. Like, okay,
yeah,
you have now gone through your rite of passage.
Exactly, and she's rewarded by just them loving her. And there's that moment where they find out that she's a virgin, and they're so horrified, and they're like, well, how? Because they're just so promiscuous. They've just been these wild girls their whole lives, and then one of them, it just always cracks me up that one of them just says, "Who can we call?"
It's like, it feels like Vivian just came in and she's like, "Oh, I've never had a haircut," and they're like, "What?"
What? Yeah. It's like, I think the line in the book is that she says, "They looked at me as though they had just found out that I had never learned how to cross the street." Like, what? How can you be this age and you don't know how to cross the street? Like, here, we'll take care of it. Who can we call? So yeah, they just jumped to it. And I had a blast. I'm glad you enjoyed that scene. I had a total blast writing it.
So funny. So, like, besides that sex scene, there's also quite some more sex in the book. And one thing that I really enjoyed about reading those passages was mainly because I don't know, it feels a bit silly to say, but it felt kind of like permission or something. Like, yes, women are like allowed to enjoy things that are like their sexuality and sex. So I don't know, like, was there anything that you when you were writing those passages that was like really important for you to include, like for instance, like the atmosphere or kind of like a message or something like that?
Yeah, I think what I wanted to show more than anything was I wanted to show that not only that women are capable of enjoying sex. So what I felt was that how can I put this? Women are also capable of behaving very badly. And by badly, I mean without integrity, without ethics. That's not something that is restricted only to male behavior. And that women are capable of making really bad choices for themselves, and that they can survive those bad choices. I think one of the other messages that is often conveyed in literature about female sexuality is how terribly, terribly dangerous it is, how high the stakes are, and one false move in your life is ruined. And I just wanted to liberate the reader's imagination from that, and instead introduce this possibility, as I often say, if women could not survive our terrible judgment when it comes to sex and romance and love, there would not be a woman left alive on the planet. We can have terrible judgment too. So lots of times when I'm reading people talk about City of Girls, they'll say it's so refreshing to have a book that's about women who are in control of their sexuality. And I kind of want to say a little, but it's also about women who are not in control of their sexuality, meaning it is about women who are being controlled by their sexuality, women who are being driven by their urges to behave in ways that are not in accordance with their integrity. Because sometimes that's what happens too, is that you get swept up in stuff and you get carried away in stuff, and you act in ways that you later were like, why did I do that? So I wanted that to be part of it as well. So I didn't just want it to be like, yay, rah, rah, sex positive. I wanted it to be, yay, rah, rah, sex positive, and there are consequences, and those consequences can be really painful, and you can survive them. It's a lot to try to say in one sex scene, but that's kind of where I was going. Yeah, sex and romantic lives are not tidy.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I mean, it's not like we see one guy and it's like, okay, it has to be that one, and then you like spend the rest of your life with that. Like the I don't know, like when you're talking to like girlfriends and like all their experiences, it's just, I don't know, we share so many like traumatic experiences.
Yeah.
and it's also like just fun. Like, okay, at least we've like had that experience, you know.
Well, that's the beauty of those female relationships, is the ability to, you know, what did they say? Comedy is tragedy plus time. You know, and when you're with your girlfriends, that time speeds up, and the tragedy can turn into comedy sometimes within a couple days, you know.
Yeah.
And this is not to lessen true tragedy that can happen to people in the realms of sex or romance, or true harm that can happen to people. It's just to say that every woman, you know, there's a line in the book where Vivian says, after a certain age, we wear bodies that are made of secrets and stories. You know, we're all composed of these stories and our histories, and some of it we can reconcile, and some of it we can't, and some of it we can laugh at later, and some of it we still cry about, and some of it, but it's, you know, we're complex, and so I feel like that's what I want more than anything to do with my time and my talents, is to write stories about women who are complex, because we are.
And like going on about the complexity of women, another thing that I really liked about the female characters in this book is that there was obviously so much nuance to them, in the sense that, for instance, you have Edna and Celia, and both of them are like so incredibly confident, like standing in their womanhood, but in completely different ways. I thought that was just like so great to see, like that it's when like not a monolith, and that we can be like whatever we want to be. And I was just wondering, like, how did those characters start to form, like when you were writing the book?
Yeah, so with Celia, what I wanted was, you know, the fast girl, that wicked Jessica Rabbit kind of. That's how I always pictured her. Sort of, you know, somebody who Rita Hayworth would have played in a movie. You know, there's stereotypes around that character as well. You know, all of these characters are there's danger everywhere of falling into stereotype. And one of the stereotypes that you can fall into with a girl like that is that she later becomes a victim of her own ways, of her own beauty. You know, and it was so important to me that Celia survive herself.
Yeah.
And so there's a little secret in the book that comes later that is just a little moment where we get to be like, rock on, Celia. You're like,
yes.
Yeah, you know, like, because typically that story is she gets murdered by a lover. She gets, you know, and it's not like Celia has consequence-free sex. There's a scene in the book where she's beaten up and basically raped, and literally raped, and not untraumatized by it, but also it doesn't alter her identity. You know, she's still the same person who she was. She still takes the same risks that she took before. And, you know, I didn't want to see, I can't bear to see women destroyed, you know, even when terrible things happen to them, because the reality of women, the real reality of women, is that we're very hard to destroy. Very, very hard to destroy. We're very easy to hurt. We're very easy to hurt, but we're very, very hard to destroy. Female resilience is quite an extraordinary feature. And then Edna, she's an older woman. She's her beauty is fading. Typically, the story of her would be that she would be competitive with these younger women, but she wasn't. She was embracing of them. And then when she ends up being betrayed, her resilience is extraordinary, you know, and her power in that betrayal, and the way that she chooses to move through that betrayal is extraordinary. So, yeah, there's not a weak woman in that book, but there's very few weak women in the fucking world. You know, like, you know, somebody said to me recently, "Why do you always write books about strong women?" I'm like, what other kind of women are there? Who have you been hanging out with? Like, all women are strong. You know, it doesn't mean that we're not sensitive. It doesn't mean that we're not damaged. It just means that we're really, 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 really resilient.
Yeah. No, definitely. I think that's something that a lot of people just tend to misunderstand, like the difference between like being vulnerable and being able to completely become shattered and like not being able to like get yourself back up again, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, I think a problem we have with the stereotype when you have a character in movies or in books who's a strong female character, the way that that's written is she's invulnerable. She's Rambo, she's girl Rambo, right? And that to me is not interesting either. You know, what I want is resilience. You know, more than anything else. My friend Martha Beck always says that when you're reading books about tragedies, she goes, any author can lead you into hell, but I want an author who can lead me into hell and then out. And you know, that's like, and the people who I love and admire in my life are the people who have been in hell and now they're out. You know, so like that's the definition of resilience, is that hell happened and somehow you found your way through it. Those are kind of the only people I hang around with.
But in the end, those are like the best people.
The best.
Yeah.
The best.
Exactly. Like I don't know, it just reminds me of kind of like my own mom and just like my grandmother as well. Like they've been like through so many hardships and like still being able to like stand strong. It's just kind of like, I don't know, it gives you power as well. You feed off of that energy.
And you are their rightful inheritor. Like, you are the descendant of that. That's in you too. And that's something that I always find when I'm going through really hard stuff. I think, you know, in this moment in history when it's a really scary moment, to just remind all of us that every single one of us is the descendant of survivors. You know, literally, none of us would be here if our ancestors had not been survivors. It's generation after generation after generation of survivors. And that's, we inherited their DNA, quite literally. We are that. We just don't want to test it out, you know, like, and we'll do anything we can to avoid testing it out, because we don't, I'd rather, certainly if I had children and I don't, I would rather that they never had to find out what good survivors they were. You know, like I don't want them to know that. I don't want the people that I know to have to go through that. And yet the universe and life is generous enough to constantly give you opportunities to prove it.
Exactly.
You know, it's coming the times when you'll be tested, but yeah, that's who we are. It's what we're made out of.
Yeah, I think it's also so interesting because like change and bad stuff happening is always like very distressing and anxiety inducing, but like I always kind of like find like once you've come out like on the other side, it I don't know, it's just, it feels so satisfying, like, okay, I made it through, I survived, I'm still here.
I think of it as Earth School. So I've been meaning for a long time, as soon as I can be allowed to be touched by a human being again, I'm planning to get a tattoo that says Earth School class of 1969, because that's the year I arrived in Earth School. And I really do think that the only way in my cosmic reality, the only way that I can accept the tremendous amount of suffering, injustice, trauma, loss, death, pain that everyone has to go through in their life. I mean, and no exceptions, you know, no matter how coddled and no matter how privileged, no one gets out of this without massive tests. I just think, it's Earth School. It's a school for souls, and it's where souls come to advance. And it's a really tough school, and it's a really, really tough school. And as an old woman who I used to admire used to say, God saves the toughest assignments for the best students. You know, like it's hard. Earth School is hard, but like, but you're right, because you do adapt. You are resilient. You do find your strength. And my friend Rob Bell, who's this great teacher, always says, he has got this great thing about it where he says, you know, he does this thing on stage where he gets these two whiteboards, and on one whiteboard he writes words like failure, despair, loss, pain, and on the other one he writes like success, happiness, advancement, pleasure. And then he's like, if you were to look at these two boards, all you're trying to do in your life is get away from the one that's failure, pain, and devastation, and get on to the side that's happiness and contentment and success and achievement. But he said, by the same token, if I were to ask you what were the 3 events in your life that most formulated you into the character who you needed to be, did they come off of the bad list or the good list? And they always come, the stuff on the bad list is the thing that forges you in the crucible and turns you into who you are. And he goes, and the conclusion, therefore, is something very interesting is happening in the universe. And that's as far as he'll go with it. He's like, something big. He goes, because you don't want to say, try to suffer. You don't want to say, like, you should be trying to avoid suffering. And yet, something very interesting is going on here. Something very interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Just, I don't know, just thinking about that exercise, it is kind of true. Like the things that I've learned the most of, like like for instance, for me with university has been so incredibly hard, also like with friends and stuff like that. And just thinking about, okay, like if I wouldn't have had such a hard time at school, or like being bullied and stuff like that, I wouldn't have been like the person I am now today, who like loves books and found like a whole new space on the internet where I found like the most wonderful friends who I've never had such friendships before, and it's just like, okay, through all that suffering I still ended up with like amazing people that I have the privilege of calling my friends, and like even getting to talk to you, like, oh my gosh, like
it's such a delight. I mean, and it's so, and yet if you had a child, wouldn't you do anything to spare them from that pain? And if you cared about somebody, all you would do is spare them from that pain. And that's part of our humanity too, is that we know for ourselves. I always think about this with my friends who are parents. I'm like, you know damn well that the things that made you into who you were the worst things that ever happened to you. And all you're trying to do is make sure that never happens to your kids, but it will, despite, like it will, and they will be shaped by it. And you can't, and you'll have to watch while somebody suffers, and that's the worst. That's the worst, it's tough. Go ahead.
It's because it's interesting also, like looking at like parents. Obviously, like my own parents always want the best for me, but like for instance, the parents who are able to provide like a comfortable life and like have everything set out for their kids, and still they'll find like a way to like
they'll find a way. And
like,
life will find a way to get in that bubble too. It just will. You cannot protect a human being from the experience of being a human being.
Exactly.
you just can't, no matter how much you wish you could.
Exactly. Now, going a bit back to the book and like the setting, because I absolutely loved the setting you chose. I love like vintage clothes and like lifestyle and everything like that. And I was wondering, like, had you ever considered like other scenes, like for instance old Hollywood, or like the music scene, because like theatre is very theatrical and very dramatic, but
I didn't really, because the whole book got started when I went to visit my great aunt Lolly, who's now almost 100. And I went to visit her. When I went to visit her, however many years it was, she was cleaning out her house, and she gave me a stack of books. And they included a pile of books by a guy named Alexander Woollcott, who makes a brief appearance in my novel as a side character. And Alexander Woollcott was, in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, a very prominent columnist, theater critic, playwright, and he was a member of the Dorothy Parker's Algonquin Circle. He was part of that whole gang. And he was extremely famous back in the day, and he's not very well known now at all. He wrote a play called The Man Who Came to Dinner, which I think is what he's most remembered for. But, I mean, he was one of the most famous men in America at the time. And he was a writer for the New Yorker magazine, and he had a column in the New York Herald. And so one of these books that my aunt gave me was a collection of profiles that he had written in the New Yorker magazine. And they were profiles of actresses and actors. And they were about the theater world, because he was so featured in the theater world. And they were all written from the late 20s to the mid 40s. And oh my God, I fell so in love with that world just by reading those. And a lot of them were actors I'd never heard of because they were stage actors. And there's a line in City of Girls where she's talking about Edna, and she says, you wouldn't have heard of her because she was a very famous stage actress, but the tragedy of a stage actress is there's no record of it. And once she's gone, she's gone. And so, and she never did film, so you wouldn't have known who she was. It was people like that who were these great British and American grand dames and divas who were coming to New York to do shows. And he would go and sit at the Sherry Netherland with them at the hotel and have cocktails and talk to them and write these profiles. And I just wanted to jump into that world, like that's usually how my novels start, is like, I want to play in there. Like, I want to play in that playground. I want to be at the Sherry Netherland having cocktails with a beautiful aging actress from London who's very witty and is here to play Lady Macbeth, like in 1938. I want to be in there. Like, put me in that scene. And so that's what began. So it didn't occur to me to change it to Hollywood. I wanted it to be in New York. I don't know as much about music. I feel like music is such a specific, it's really such a gift to understand. I feel like I understood the theater world more intrinsically because I used to do plays when I was younger. So I felt like
so cool.
I kind of know what it's like to put on a show.
Oh, that's so cool. Last year, I joined the National Youth Theatre in the UK. Yeah, so I got to
Cool.
it was such a nice experience, and so I got to be around like all these directors and hear from people who had done the same program as well. And it's just so interesting, like going to the West End and seeing all these plays, and it's just like an entirely different world from like movies and stuff like that. It's just so interesting.
Yeah, and it's so vivid. I mean, I never was, I put on plays in high school, but a friend of mine who's a Broadway actor, when he read City of Girls and he read the scenes of the producing of the play, because in the book there's a play called City of Girls that's being produced, that's a musical, and you see it from inception to being brought to the stage, and he was like, how did you know all this? Like, how did you know that the week before the play opens, everyone is always sick? Everyone is sharing the same makeup and they all get the same cold sores and herpes. In the book, actually, the girls are sharing the dancers are sharing the same costumes and they all get like pubic lice from each other, and the costume director's like, stop, you have to stop sharing clothes. You have to stop sharing makeup. And instead of the play getting better as it gets closer to opening night, it gets worse. And there's a dress rehearsal where every single time they do it, it gets worse. And everyone's is exhausted and sniping at each other. And he's like, did you go and study Broadway theater? I was like, no, I was in a play when I was 14 years old, and that's what it was like. It's like, it's the same if you're 14 years old as if you're doing a Broadway show. That's just what it's like to put on a production. At the end, everyone's stressed, everyone's exhausted, nothing is working, and then there's that moment of magic where it actually all comes together. And I remember that feeling, at my own level of doing, Guys and Dolls in high school or whatever. So yeah, you can take these, as a writer, you can draw experiences from your life. I don't need to be a Broadway actor to know what it's like to put on a play. I just have to remember what it was like when I was in high school and assume that it's the same, because we all know that the whole world is just high school.
Yes. Who knew?
It's the same rivalries, the same love triangles, the same heartbreaks. It's just never any different. So,
Exactly.
Yeah.
The person who said like things will get better after high school is a liar.
Well, things won't get better, but you'll get better at handling things.
Exactly. Yeah. That is definitely true. So one thing I was wondering about was the editing process. Did you have to like take a lot of things out or add a lot of stuff?
I have a really great editor at Riverhead, Sarah McGrath. I've had some great editors in my day, but she is really top notch. And she has a light hand, but a judicious hand. And I have great faith in her. So we worked together on the editing of it. But she really loved the basic structure of the book. So there wasn't massive editing that needed to be done, but she was more likely to come in and say, this scene is too long, or we need more development of this character here, or shorten the stuff of the reporting on what was going on during World War II. That's starting to drag. Some of the dialogue she felt with the showgirls was too cliched. It was a little bit too like, hey, yeah, wow, you, hey, kiddo, why don't you slap on over to my, like, I'd done all my research on 1940s slang. Yeah, exactly. I had done so much research. My friend Ann Patchett always says about certain books, she goes, that person researched that book for 7 years and now we all must pay. Where it's like, why do we need to know everything you know, right? Like, so definitely with the dialogue in my first draft, a reader had to pay for the fact that I had done research and I knew every 1940s slang and I'd stuck 6 examples of it into every sentence. She's like, I don't think they were just only speaking in slang. Like they probably had real conversations too. So yeah, she did stuff like that. But it wasn't a massive undertaking. We work really well together, and because it was such a fun book, I think we both just kind of had fun just shaping it up.
Oh, that's so great. I mean, because I know, like, having talked to like a lot of authors previously with these interviews, some have also said that it's like the most terrifying thing, like having a story edited, especially if like you're writing your first book, because it's like someone saying, okay, and this, and why is this, and could you like take this out?
And the thing is, you've done your best, so it's not like you turned in something that, I mean, you might not think it's very good, but you also know that you've made it as good as you can make it by the time you turn it in. So there's a little bit of a sense sometimes when editors come back into that and they're like, improve it, where you're like, I would if I could. I actually, this is me at my best. Like, improving it's going to be very difficult because this is as good a writer as I am, but that's where the beauty of the editorial relationship can come in, where somebody can coach you and guide you to actually be better than you are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so interesting. So, last question before the quickfire questions that I have for you. I know now that last year, City of Girls, it was announced that a movie is coming out, which had me so thrilled and hyped. I'm so excited. And I know you probably can't say like anything about it.
I don't know much more than you do, actually. But yeah, go ahead and ask your question. Uh-huh.
My question is like, maybe you could talk a bit about your involvement. Like, are there things that you know for sure you'll be doing, like working on the movie?
Yeah. Okay. So that I can't answer because I am lucky enough that I've been in this situation a couple of times before. So Eat, Pray, Love, of course, was made into a movie. And then also the movie Coyote Ugly was a movie based on an article that I wrote for GQ magazine 25 years ago or however long ago. And I had a number when I was a journalist. I've sold, like, the Signature of All Things, the movie rights for that were sold to BBC and they ended up not doing it. So I've had a lot of interaction with it. And so here is what I have learned. I have learned the 4 words that you need to know as a writer if you're dealing with anything having to do with a Hollywood or movie production or adaptation of your work are, if you want to have a serene life, those 4 words are stay out of it. Just stay out of it. It's none of your business. You sold it. Be very happy that you got to cash the check. And basically my position has become over the years, thank you so much. I'm 100% honored. I'll see you at the premiere, right? Like, do what you want to do. Do what you want to do. It's not mine anymore. I think where you get into a kind of an ego battle is when you sell something, but you don't give it away. Right. So if you sell something, you have to also give it away, I feel. Otherwise it's going to be really hard. So I'm like very hands off and I was on the Eat, Pray, Love set for one afternoon for about an hour in Rome just to see it happening. And then I was like, okay, bye guys. See you at the premiere, and then you also get the fun of seeing what they do. Getting to enjoy that, the big reveal, like what did they make it into? So I am not particularly involved. I had the woman, Sue Kroll, who's the producer, and she was one of the producers behind A Star is Born and Motherless Brooklyn. And she's great. She's a very strong woman who's been working in Hollywood for years. And when we had lunch, I'm almost like too dismissive. Like when we had lunch, I was like, I don't care. Do whatever you want with it. Hire whoever you want. Make it whatever. And she was like, well, we would like you to have some involvement in it if you would. I said, but I don't, because I always assume they don't want me around either because they've got their own vision and they're doing their own thing. So that is all I know, except for that they're a lovely team. They're super excited about it. And I assume that like everything else in the world, all production has been shut down at the moment. But I would certainly love to see that book on screen because just for the costumes, right,
Yes.
Seji? Just for the costumes.
Exactly. I just have it like in my mind, just seeing the showgirls from like backstage and all the lighting and the glitter and feathers. It's going to be great. So excited. So excited.
Thanks, honey. I'm excited too.
So I have a few quick-fire questions for you. Nothing too out there, but
okay. Let's do it. I like quick-fire questions.
Okay. So your favorite childhood author and book?
L. Frank Baum, The Wizard of Oz series.
Ooh,
the whole boxed set, not even necessarily the one that everyone's familiar with, the first book, but the whole series with the original illustrations, Art Deco illustrations from the early 20th century. Oh my God, they are the most beautiful, exquisite books. And they've reprinted them now with the original illustrations, and every household should have these books. They are truly magical.
I did not know that it was a series.
Oh, honey, they're so fun. They're so great. And it's the first major work of children's literature where the adventure belongs to a girl, and not by accident, because L. Frank Baum, the author of The Wizard of Oz, both his wife and his mother-in-law, were both incredibly prominent suffragette feminist activists in the late 19th and early 20th century. His mother-in-law was the head of the Kansas Women's Suffragette organization. So he had a very feminist streak in him, and it's no accident that it's a hero's journey starring a girl. And there really were not any before that. So it's also very groundbreaking as a feminist tract.
That's so cool. I have so much like on because like at school we never like read any English literature, so I've been like catching up on a lot of things.
Treat yourself to the Wizard of Oz books. They're so and get the ones with the original illustrations because they're so fantastic.
Okay, I'll make sure to try and check them out. And the next question: who are writers at the moment that you really enjoy?
Well, I think the greatest living author at the moment is Hilary Mantel. She wrote the Wolf Hall series. I'm right now in the middle of the third and final book. I literally do not know how she exists. She is so staggeringly brilliant, and those books are so devastatingly good. And I think as an author, a lot of times I can admire. There's so many authors whose work I admire, but when I read them as their peer, I read the book and I see it from an admiring standpoint, and I say, oh yeah, I see how you did that. That's cool. That's really good. It's kind of like a carpenter looking at another carpenter's work and saying like, oh, nicely done on those drawer pulls. Yeah, I see, like, but when I read Hilary Mantel, I'm like, you're not from this planet. Like, I don't know. How are you an existent being? How are you able to do this? You're so good. So yeah, I don't think there's any, and I've read her earlier work as well. I mean, she got very famous with the Wolf Hall books and the 2 Booker Prizes and the movies and the Broadway show based on it and everything. But she had a big body of work before that. And again, it's miraculous. Every single book is completely different, a completely different voice. I'm like, I truly don't really think she's fully human.
It's like looking at a magician or something.
It's like how I feel. It's like how it's so much easier for me to believe that aliens built the pyramids than to imagine how humans did that. I'm like, no, aliens did that. That's impossible.
Can't be done.
Brain cannot compute.
Exactly. I recently got into her work because I had seen like during violin lesson my teacher always had like one of her books on on his desk. I was
Uh-huh.
always a bit interested, and then I saw that it got like nominated, longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction. I was
Yeah.
like, okay, I'll try and check it out. So I listened to the audio, and I was like, how is it even possible to like write about all these things that are like how?
Isn't it incredible? I bet, I haven't heard the audio. Do you know who did the narration offhand? Is
I
it a
don't
man? A
know.
man?
Yeah, it is a man.
I would
Yeah.
think it would have to be. Yeah.
Mhm.
I need to download that because I bet that is so good. I bet it's a great British stage actor or something, and I bet that it's so good
Yeah.
because the dialogue is so good. Yeah, very cool.
What's the best writing advice you were ever given?
Write your book to somebody. My sister taught me that, and my sister's also a writer. Actually, I would love for you to read her book that just won the Newbery Prize last year.
Oh, wow.
She's a young adult novelist, and she wrote a book called Book of Boy that I have to say is really appropriate for this moment. I might need to make an Instagram announcement about this because it is a book about a young boy who's traveling on foot with a mysterious stranger through post-plague Europe. And it's 1 or 2 years after the plague has completely decimated Western Europe. And it's this just completely transformed landscape of empty housing. It's this post-apocalyptic in a way. And it's such a good book. And she won the Newbery for it. But she taught me at a young age, because she was always a writer, make sure that whenever you sit down to write something, you're writing it directly to one person. So not a demographic. Don't talk to a demographic and don't talk to the void. Choose one person who you know in your life who you would like to delight or educate or entertain or help, and then write that book directly in your voice to that voice. And that will bring your humanity forth, and it also brings company into the writing room so that you've got that person that you're talking to and you don't have to be alone.
And is it like always the same person you write for, or is it
Nope.
different?
Each one of my books has been written to somebody else, and that's why it's such an important question, because you speak differently to different people. You change the intellectual level of your voice depending on who you're speaking to. You change the way you use curse words. You change the tone. You change the patronizing tone of your voice or the intimate tone of your voice. We all speak differently to every single person in our life. We modulate that, and so it's a really important question. And it's the question I always ask people when they tell me they're working on a book and they're struggling with it. I always say, who are you talking to? And usually they don't know, or if they do know, they answer with a demographic. This is a book for, middle grade readers, or this is a book for women over the age of 50 who are starting their lives over after an illness. I'm like, okay, that's not a person.
Exactly.
That's a voting block, but it's not a person. So find one person in your life who represents that, and then tell your story directly to them.
Oh, that's such great advice.
It changes everything.
I
It
think it
opens up
helps
the
us.
whole dynamic. Yeah.
What's a book you read in the past year and that you really enjoyed, and one that you're looking forward to? Except like anything from Hilary Mantel.
Okay, so the book I read recently that I most enjoyed was called Boy Swallows Universe, and it's by an Australian writer named Trent D'Arby. He's an Australian journalist, and it's a semi-autobiographical novel that has some supernatural elements as well, which I loved. And it's about two young brothers in Queensland, Australia in the 1980s who are trying to survive their childhoods. They've got, and it's no small feat. They've got drug addicted parents, and who are not just drug addicts, but drug dealers, and who are really lovely people also. I mean, this is how you know that he was actually writing from life, is that the subtlety and the paradox of the fact that how much he loves his mother, and she happens to be a drug addict, and and how much he loves his stepfather, who happens to be a drug dealer, and they're also trying to survive the drug wars that are going on between rival gangs, between Vietnamese immigrant gangs and other Native Australian gangs. His babysitter, who's looking out for him the whole time that his parents are off being on drugs or selling drugs, is an escaped convict who turns out to be just this really lovely, wise figure. And there's this weird supernatural time travel-y kind of strange element to it as well. It's brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. And I describe it as like, do you know that candy Pop Rocks that you put in your mouth and it bubbles? Reading Boy Swallows Universe is like taking the entire pack and putting it in your mouth and then setting your head on fire. Like, it's got this energy that's just like so outrageous. So that's the book that I most enjoyed. The one that I'm looking forward to, what am I looking forward to? Samantha Irby is a writer who I love so much. She's also fantastic on Instagram. Her new book, which is called Wow, Thanks, No. With the bunny on it.
Yeah.
I've got it, but I've read bits of it because she's an essayist. So parts of it have come out already. She is hilarious. Like anything, when I found out she had a new book coming out months ago, I put a picture of the cover on Instagram with a note saying, there's only 2 words you have to put on a cover for me to buy it. And those words are Samantha Irby. So, that's a book that I'm really looking forward to. She's brilliant, hilarious, observant essayist beyond. She's beyond.
That's cool. I'll put it on my to TBR list.
I bet you have a very significant TBR list, my dear.
Yeah, there are stacks of books.
I can't even imagine. Can't even imagine.
Yeah, but it's fun. It's loads of fun though. So moving on to the next question. Now I know you love traveling, but besides that and anything like book related, is there something else that you really enjoy, like as a pastime?
Yeah, my favorite pastime is I have 2. One is walking. I'm a really big walker, and last year I did a trip with a friend of mine where we walked through France for 2 weeks. Yeah, and I mean, I really could just walk forever. That is my joy, and so I'm always happy on a long walk. And I got that from my dad. And he actually hiked the entire Appalachian Trail, which is several thousand miles. And I did pieces of it with him. But I don't love hiking as much. Like, hiking to me indicates a lot of discomfort with a big, heavy backpack and camping and all those hard things. I love walking. I just love, and I love being dropped into a new city and spending an entire day walking around the city and learning my way around it on foot. That's my greatest joy. And it straightens out my head, it straightens out my emotions. It's a beautiful way to see the world on foot. I love it. And I also love writing in my journal and drawing in my journal. And I love writing poetry, which I very, very, very rarely share. But I write a lot of poetry just for fun.
Do you read a lot of poetry as well?
I'm not as well read and adept in poetry as I wish that I were, but no, I do write a lot of it. Isn't that terrible? I don't read a lot of it, but I write a lot of it. I only read my own.
It's only mine is good enough to be read.
Only mine. If the other poets were better, I would read them.
If only.
No, I have my favorites. I love the poet Jack Gilbert. I love Mary Oliver, obviously. We all do. I love David White. There's certain living poets who I love, but I definitely would not say that I am the mistress of all poetry in terms of being well read.
Yeah, because I recently started getting into poetry, and for me it's always been, I don't know, like a sort of mystery, because it's like, okay, how do I read it? Am I supposed to like really think hard about it, or like I don't know.
It's like, I feel like it's like opera. I was taught by somebody how to watch opera, because that's another one where you feel like, and modern art, where you feel like if you're not educated in it, you're not allowed to understand it or enjoy it. And so you can feel like that it's very off-putting, that you're not invited, that you're not invited into opera, you're not invited into modern art. But that a friend of mine just said, you go to the opera and you shut your eyes and you let it break over you like a wave. And that's all you have to, and you don't need to know what they're saying, and you don't need to know what the story is, and you don't know what the history of the musician is. You just let it break over you like a wave. And that is so beautiful to me. And I feel like poetry is a little bit like that too. And if it's breaking over you like a wave, then it's working. And if it's not, then it's not a good poem.
Yeah, that's a pretty straightforward way to
The
go
job
about
of the
it.
poem is to break over you like a wave.
Exactly. I broke my glasses this week. It's
Oh no.
terrible. Yeah, I left them on the floor and I
Of
stepped on
course.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's what glasses are for. It's their ultimate
exactly.
fate. Their ultimate fate is to be left on the floor and stepped on.
But it's not the worst fate one of my classes has had. I remember I was like, I think about 14 when I got my first pair, and they're so incredibly itchy on your nose if you haven't had them on for a very long time. So this one time I was going I was like volunteering at like an old people's home, and I was on my way there, and it was just so annoying. So I was like, okay, I'll just put it in my pocket. But I was going over like a carway, so there was this bump, and so I went up with my bike, and my glasses fell off, and
Oh
I heard
no.
something, and I was
Oh
like, oh no.
no. The worst.
And the worst part was that there was a car coming. So I was like, no, stop! And it just rode over my pair of glasses.
No. Oh no.
It was so bad, and it was like slow motion, and they
No.
flew
It's
up
like in the
the
movies.
air.
No. With the slow bullet.
Exactly. And so the guy just passed, and they were just decimated basically. And it was like, it felt like a movie as well, because like I had done like my shift afterwards, and I had to ride my bike home, and of course it had to rain, and I was scared because I had it just for like 2 weeks, and I had to come home and tell my mom like, those expensive glasses that you bought me like 2 weeks ago, they're spoiled. So I spent like half an hour in the rain, like crying on my way back home. Yeah, so tragic.
That is, I don't think it's any hyperbole to say that is the worst story and saddest thing I've ever heard.
But at least like these ones I paid for myself.
But that's the stuff that makes you resilient, as we were discussing. You'll be stronger.
Exactly.
You'll be stronger.
This time I did not cry when they broke, although I was still very sad.
Good job. Good job.
So I have 3 more quickfire questions.
Okay.
The first one is, if you were a showgirl, what would your showgirl name be?
Blaze. Blaze. No doubt about it.
I was thinking about
Blaze Conway. Blaze West. Some kind of, something like that. Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about this last night, and I was like, for me, it would be Midnight Diamond.
Oh, nice. Nice. Love it.
So what's something like fashion-wise you wish would come back like into style?
Women wearing men's suits. I mean, a lot of that happens when people are identifying, with different gender. There's like some beautiful, or gender nonconforming. There's some beautiful tailors now in Brooklyn that are making great suiting for women. And my partner Ray had a gorgeous 3-piece suit made. But I love those pictures of Marlene Dietrich and Greta Garbo back in the day wearing those men's suits. And nothing looks sharper than a beautiful woman in a man's suit. It is so hot. So that is like that's definitely something that I wish. And it came back a little in the 70s because like Diane Keaton used to wear suits and still does. In Annie Hall, that kind of look. I think that's really hot.
but now it's a bit kind of like more shoulder pads and like it's a bit looser than like really like.
Yeah. I mean, it comes back periodically. I'm thinking again, it also came back in the 80s. There was this little period of women wearing shoulder pads and suiting. And I think as I'm saying it, I'm just fantasizing about like next time I go and do an event in public, whenever that may be, it would just be really cool to have, like, I just love the idea of wearing like a really good suit, but not a suit that's supposed to be not a feminine suit, a kind of masculine suit on a woman's body. I think that's great.
Like how do you call it? Like a gilet?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
I love it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, that's
Exactly.
something
And
what I really.
tails with tails. That's like the Greta Garbo look. Yeah.
Exactly. Like I really just miss like people wearing like more fancy things during
Yeah.
the day. I don't know because like I watch a lot of like like classical concerts online, like on YouTube and stuff, and they all look so gorgeous, like in their suits,
Right.
and I'm like, oh, I wish I
So
was.
beautiful. Who has the
Exactly.
best style in all of literature is Donna Tartt. If you look at pictures of her, she dresses. Actually, I kind of modeled Edna in the book. I modeled her style on Donna Tartt, but she wears a lot of suits and vests and cravats, and she always like riding jackets. And she's very petite, and she's got this great sharp blunt bob, and she just looks like $1 billion. So yeah, if you want to see how an author should dress, Donna Tartt is the move.
I'll go check it out. One thing I miss, like with hair and stuff like that, is like I don't know. It's maybe an unpopular opinion, but like I love like a victory roll. Also like the
I love a
name.
victory roll. They're so beautiful. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I would
so
never be able
good.
to do that myself, though. I can barely do what I do. During this quarantine, to shave my head, I've always wanted to do it. And I was
Oh
like,
wow.
this would be the really cool time to try it. So if it goes on much longer, I might just
Yeah.
get out my partner Rhea was a hairdresser. I might just get out her old clippers and just buzz it down. It'd be fun.
That would be so cool, and then you can like experiment as it like grows back, different
Yeah.
colors and
It's
stuff.
just
Yeah,
hair. It's just hair.
exactly. What would be your perfect cocktail drink?
Well, I actually stopped drinking about a year ago. So for me at this moment, it would be I've been having fun. I go into restaurants and bars now, and I will ask the bartender to make me a really fun non-alcoholic cocktail because I want to feel like I'm part of it. I want to feel like I'm part of what everybody's doing, but I don't want the alcohol. So mostly for me, it would have to involve, and they usually ask for direction, and I direct them toward the flavors of ginger and lemon. So it would have to be something very sparkly that had ginger and lemon in it, maybe a little bit of mint. I like those bright, sharp flavors more than anything else.
Oh, lovely. I love like the like we have this sort of like the supermarket here, Albertijn. They have their own
I
type
know,
of
Albert. I've been in
type.
many. Yes, absolutely. Don't think I don't know what's going on in the Netherlands.
I'm sure you do. I love the ginger ale that they have because they put a lot of ginger in it. And
Yeah,
so
that's what you want. You want it to go right up your nose.
yes,
Yes. I want it to come
exactly
out my
that.
eyes. Yeah, I love it.
Exactly, like perfect drink. And I tried to get it online since they're now doing like online delivery, but
Yeah.
it was sold out.
Oh
So
no.
sad.
This is the second most tragic story I've heard today.
Exactly. My life is just full of tragedies.
It's just one catastrophe after another.
Exactly, and you haven't heard the worst of it. Thinking about like a cocktail drink, I was thinking about because I don't know, I don't really drink either, but I was thinking about something like really fancy, like red, very dark, kind of maybe because I've been watching a lot of vampire like series, but but something like fruity and sickeningly sweet as well, and
something with
know.
grenadine in it. I used to be a bartender.
Oh, wow.
And I was a bartender at the Coyote Ugly Saloon, which was a very dumpy, rough redneck place. And I didn't really know how to make drinks other than to pour beer and give people shots. But and people in that place didn't often order mixed beverages. They mostly just ordered beer and shots. But the owner of the bar said to me, if anybody ever comes in here and orders a fancy cocktail, do your best to make it. Just get the color right. As long as the color is right, they usually don't protest. He said, get the color right, and then charge them $20 for it, and then take them outside and beat them up. We don't want that kind of person in this bar.
Get out of here!
Get out of here, you! Oh well, honey, it's been so fun talking to you. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
We
thank you
went
so
from day
much.
into night. The sun left
Exactly.
you and the sun left me.
Exactly. It was so much fun. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Angel. I love what you do in the world. Just obviously keep doing it. And you have such a great spirit. And I'm happy that we finally got a chance to talk face to face safely.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. From a safe
From a
distance. Yeah.
safe distance. Bye,
Distance. Yeah.
sweetheart.
Yes.
Lots of
Bye
love. Take care.
bye. Lots of
Bye.
love. Bye.